For centuries, travelers and historians have struggled to describe what it must have been like to approach this city for the first time. Even those who saw it with their own eyes found their words inadequate. It was a place that should not have been possible, a metropolis built in the middle of a lake, rising from the water as if conjured by some divine will. And yet it was real as the mountains that surrounded it, as real as the earth beneath your feet. Tonight we will journey into that world. We will walk the stone causeways and glide through the canals. We will stand in the great plaza at the foot of the sacred pyramids. We will watch the sun rise over the volcanoes and see the city come to life in the soft morning light. We will meet the people who built this impossible place, who transformed a swampy refuge into one of the largest and most sophisticated cities on earth. This is not a story of conquest or collapse. This is the story of Tenochtitlan, before the world changed, a city in its full glory, a civilization at the height of its power and creativity. Now let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let the hum of engines and the glow of screens dissolve into the mist. Settle into this moment, this quiet hour before the sun breaks over the eastern peaks. We are going back, far back, to a time when this valley was a world of water and stone, when the lakes were full and the air was clean, when a people who had wandered for generations finally found their home on an island no one else wanted. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them rest gently on these words. Breathe slowly. The journey is long, but there is no hurry. Time moves differently here, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the place where history and imagination meet. Let us begin. The Valley of Mexico is a strange and beautiful place, a high basin cradled by mountains and volcanoes, sitting more than 7,000 feet above the sea. It is a world unto itself, ringed by peaks that seem to touch the sky. To the east, the great snow-capped volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl rise like sleeping giants, their summits often lost in clouds. To the west and south, lower ranges of forested hills create a natural boundary, enclosing the valley in a kind of geographic embrace. The air here is thin and clear, the sky a deep, intense blue that seems to go on forever. At the bottom of this basin, fed by countless springs and seasonal streams that tumble down from the mountains, there was once a system of 5 interconnected lakes. These were not deep lakes, but shallow, reed-choked bodies of water that expanded and contracted with the seasons, their edges blurred by marshes and wetlands. The northernmost lake, Zumpango, was small and brackish. Below it lay Lake Teotihuacan, also salty, its shores dotted with fishing villages. In the center of the valley was Lake Texcoco, the largest and most important, its waters slightly saline, fed by rivers from the mountains, but with no outlet to the sea. To the south were the freshwater lakes of Axagamilco and Chalco, their waters sweet and clear, surrounded by fields and forests. This was a landscape shaped by water and stone, by volcanic eruptions and slow accumulation of sediment. The soil here was rich, darkened by centuries of volcanic ash, capable of producing abundant crops when properly tended. The climate was mild and temperate, with a rainy season in summer that brought relief from the dry months, filling the lakes and turning the valley green. It was a paradise, in its way, a place where human beings could thrive if they learned to work with the water rather than against it. But it was also a place of challenges, a basin with no natural drainage, prone to flooding when the rains were heavy, the lakes threatening to overflow and swallow the settlements on their shores. The people who lived here had to be clever, resourceful, and patient. They had to understand the rhythms of water and season, the delicate balance between abundance and disaster, and they had to build accordingly, shaping the land and the lakes to suit their needs, creating a human landscape out of a natural one. Long before the Mexica arrived, this valley was home to other peoples, other cities, other empires that rose and fell in the slow turning of centuries. In the distant past, the Olmec influence had reached this far north, bringing with it the first stirrings of monumental architecture and organized religion. Then came the great city of Teotihuacan, the place of the gods, which dominated the valley for half a millennium. At its height, around the year 500 of the Common Era, Teotihuacan was one of the largest cities in the world, a planned metropolis of perhaps 150,000 people, its broad avenues lined with pyramids and palaces, its influence extending across Mesoamerica. The Pyramid of the Sun still stands today, a massive monument to a civilization whose true name we do not even know, for the people who built it left no written records of their language or their kings. Then Teotihuacan fell, burned and abandoned, its people scattering into the countryside, leaving behind only ruins and mysteries. After Teotihuacan came the Toltecs, who built their capital at Tula to the north of the valley, and whose warrior culture and artistic traditions would deeply influence all who came after. The Toltecs were remembered as the great craftsmen, the inventors of civilization itself, though their empire too collapsed in violence and chaos. By the time the Mexica arrived in the valley in the early 14th century, the region was divided among a patchwork of competing city-states, each claiming descent from the glorious Toltec past, each vying for dominance in a world where power shifted like the water levels of the lakes. This was a landscape steeped in memory, haunted by the ghosts of fallen empires, a place where the ruins of the past loomed over the ambitions of the present. The valley had seen cycles of rise and fall before, and it would see them again. The Mexica people were latecomers to this world, wanderers in search of a home. Their own legends spoke of a distant origin, in a place called Adztlan, somewhere far to the northwest, an island in a lake from which they had set out on a long migration southward. Led by their patron god Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, they traveled for generations, following the guidance of their priests, searching for the sign that would tell them where to settle. They were not a powerful people when they arrived in the Valley of Mexico around the year 1250. They were poor, rough, semi-nomadic, looked down upon by the established city-states as barbarians, as Chichimecs, uncivilized northerners who knew nothing of the proper ways of urban life. The settled peoples of the valley had long histories, noble lineages, claims to the Toltec heritage. The Mexica had none of these things. They were outcasts, refugees, a people without a place. For decades they wandered the valley, serving as mercenaries for various city-states, offering their skills as warriors in exchange for land and protection. They lived on the margins, in the rocky hills and swampy lake shores that no one else wanted. At one point they settled at Chapultepec, the hill of the grasshopper, a beautiful rocky outcrop with springs of fresh water. But the other city-states grew jealous and fearful of their growing strength. They were driven out, their leaders captured and sacrificed, their people scattered. The Mexica became subjects of the powerful city of Azcapotzalco, ruled by the Tepanec people, who used them as soldiers and servants. They were given a barren piece of land at Tizapan, a desolate place infested with venomous snakes. The Tepanec expected them to fail, to beg for mercy, or to leave. Instead, the Mexica thrived. They ate the snakes. They turned the wasteland into a settlement. They fought with fierce loyalty for their Tepanec masters, earning a reputation as formidable warriors. But they were still subjects, still looked down upon, still without a true home of their own. Then came the prophecy, the vision that would change everything. The priests of Huitzilopochtli received a message from their god. He told them to search for a specific sign, an eagle, perched on a cactus growing from a stone devouring a serpent. Where they found this sign, there they would build their city, and there they would become great. The priests searched the shores of Lake Texcoco, paddling through the marshes and reeds, looking for the promised omen. And one day, on a small swampy island in the western part of the lake, they found it. There, rising from the rocks and mud, was a nopal cactus, and perched upon it was a great eagle, its wings spread wide, a serpent clutched in its talons. The priests knew they had found their home. The year, according to their calendar, was Two House, which corresponds to the year 1325 in the European reckoning of time. The island was not a promising place. It was small, rocky, surrounded by shallow, brackish water. There were no trees, no fields, no natural resources, except reeds and fish. The other peoples of the valley must have thought the Mexica were mad to settle there. But the Mexica saw something others did not. They saw possibility. They saw isolation, which meant safety from enemies. They saw water, which meant transportation and a natural defense. And they saw, in their minds and in their prayers, the city they would build, the empire they would create, the destiny their God had promised them. They divided the island into 4 quarters, each aligned with the cardinal directions, each assigned to a different clan group. They built the first simple shrines to their gods, thatched huts on platforms of earth and stone, and they began the long, patient work of transforming a swampy island into a city. The genius of Tenochtitlan lay not in conquering the water, but in learning to live with it, to make it work for them. The Mexica developed a farming technique that would become the foundation of their city's food supply and its very expansion, the chinampa, often called floating gardens, though they did not truly float. To create a chinampa, workers would wade into the shallow lake and mark out a long, narrow rectangular plot, typically about 30 meters long and 2 to 3 meters wide. They would drive wooden stakes into the soft lake bed around the perimeter, creating a frame. Then they would weave together reeds, branches, and aquatic vegetation to form a kind of lattice between the stakes. On top of this lattice, they would pile layer after layer of mud dredged from the lake bottom, mixed with decaying plants and rich sediment. The pile would be built up slowly, carefully, until it rose above the water level. Around the edges, they would plant willow trees, whose roots would grow down into the lake bed, anchoring the chinampa in place and preventing erosion. Between the chinampas, narrow canals were left open, creating a grid of water and land, a network of gardens separated by waterways that served as both irrigation channels and transportation routes. The chinampas were astonishingly productive. The soil was constantly refreshed with nutrient-rich lake mud. The water level could be controlled through the canals. The mild climate allowed for multiple growing seasons each year. Maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, amaranth, and a dazzling variety of flowers and herbs grew in abundance on these artificial islands. A single chinampa could feed a family and produce surplus for trade. As the population of Tenochtitlan grew, so did the chinampas, spreading outward from the original island like a slow green tide, claiming more and more of the lake for agriculture. The city was not built on solid ground, but on a carefully constructed landscape of mud and reeds and human labor, a testament to patience and ingenuity. Walking through the chinampa zones must have felt like gliding through a garden maze. The canoes moving quietly between walls of maize and flowers, the air filled with the scent of wet earth and growing things, the water reflecting the sky. But the chinampas were only part of the transformation. The Mexica also built causeways, great stone and earth roads that connected their island city to the mainland. There were 3 main causeways, each several kilometers long, broad enough for 8 or 10 people to walk abreast. The causeways were marvels of engineering, built up from the lake bed with stones and packed earth, reinforced with wooden pilings. At intervals, they were interrupted by wooden bridges that could be removed in times of war, turning the causeways into defensive barriers. These roads served as both trade routes and fortifications, allowing goods and people to flow in and out of the city while maintaining the island's defensive isolation. Along the causeways, fresh water was carried into the city through aqueducts, twin channels built of stone and clay that brought sweet water from springs on the mainland, solving the problem of drinking water in the middle of a brackish lake. The engineering was sophisticated, the planning meticulous. Every aspect of the city's design reflected a deep understanding of hydraulics, agriculture, and urban planning. As you approach the city now, in your mind's eye, imagine traveling along one of these causeways in the early morning. The mist is lifting, and the sun is just beginning to warm the air. To either side of the causeway, the lake stretches out, dotted with canoes. Fishermen are casting their nets, drawing them back filled with silvery fish and small shrimp. Water birds, herons, ducks, egrets wade through the shallows or take flight in sudden bursts of wings. The mountains are visible in every direction, framing the valley like the walls of a great bowl. Ahead of you, the city grows larger with every step. You can see the pyramids now, 2 great stepped structures rising side by side in the sacred center, their platforms painted in brilliant colors, red and white and blue, their temples at the summit crowned with thatched roofs and carved wooden beams. Around the pyramids, the city spreads out in an orderly grid, neighborhoods of low adobe houses with flat roofs, interspersed with larger compounds, palaces and administrative buildings, schools and temples. Smoke rises from countless hearths, a thin haze that mingles with the morning mist. The sound of the city begins to reach you. Voices, the bark of dogs, the rhythmic clapping of hands shaping tortillas, the distant call of a conch shell trumpet from one of the temples. At the entrance to the city, where the causeway meets the island, there is a gate, a checkpoint where officials inspect travelers and collect tolls on goods being brought into the city. The officials are dressed in simple white cotton cloaks, their hair tied up in the style of commoners. They are polite but thorough, checking baskets and bundles, asking questions, making marks on paper made from the beaten bark of fig trees. Beyond the gate, the causeway becomes a broad avenue that leads directly into the heart of the city, toward the sacred precinct. This is the ceremonial heart of Tenochtitlan, a vast rectangular enclosure surrounded by a high wall within which stand the temples, the skull racks, the ball courts, the schools for priests and nobles. The Temple Mayor, the Great Temple, dominates the skyline, its twin staircases rising steeply to the twin shrines at the summit. The Temple Mayor is more than a building. It is the axis mundi, the center of the world in Mexica cosmology. The pyramid represents the sacred mountain, the place where earth meets sky, where the gods and humans can communicate. At the summit, there are two temples side by side. The northern temple is dedicated to Tlaloc, the ancient rain god, bringer of water and fertility, honored across Mesoamerica for thousands of years. His shrine is painted blue, the color of water and sky. The southern temple belongs to Huitzilopochtli, the young warrior god who led the Mexica to this place, the god of the sun and war, whose shrine is painted red, the color of blood and fire. The duality is intentional, a balance between the old agricultural gods and the new martial identity of the Mexica, between rain and sun, between life and death. The pyramid itself is built in layers, each successive emperor expanding and covering the previous structure, so that the temple grows larger with each generation, like the rings of a tree, encoding the city's history in stone. To stand at the base of the Temple Mayor is to feel small, to sense the weight of human effort and divine ambition pressing down from above. The pyramid is not smooth. Its sides are made of massive stone blocks, fitted together without mortar, carved with serpents and skulls and symbols of the gods. The staircases are steep, each step high and narrow, designed to be climbed slowly, with reverence. On festival days, processions wind up these stairs, priests in elaborate costumes carrying offerings, musicians playing drums and flutes, captives being led to the summit for sacrifice. The sound of the drums echoes across the city, a deep rhythmic heartbeat that can be felt in the chest as much as heard. At the summit, the priests perform the rituals that sustain the world, offering blood to the gods, ensuring that the sun will rise again, that the rains will come, that the cosmic order will hold. For the Mexica, these rituals are not cruelty. They are necessity, a sacred duty inherited from the gods themselves who sacrificed their own blood to create the world and humanity. The Mexica believe that the world has been created and destroyed 4 times before, each age ending in catastrophe, by jaguars, by wind, by fire, by flood. The current age, the 5th sun, was created at Teotihuacan in the distant past, when the gods gathered and one of them threw himself into a great fire to become the sun. But this sun is fragile, requiring constant nourishment to continue its journey across the sky. Without the offering of human blood, the most precious liquid, the sun would stop moving, the world would end in darkness and earthquakes, and humanity would be devoured by monsters. This is the burden the Mexica carry, the knowledge that they stand between order and chaos, that their rituals are what keep the cosmos functioning. It is a worldview both terrifying and empowering, one that gives profound meaning to every act of sacrifice, every festival, every prayer. Around the sacred precinct, the city spreads out in organized neighborhoods called calpulli, each a kind of extended family group or clan with its own temple, its own school, its own traditions. The residential areas are a mix of social classes. The common people live in simple homes made of adobe bricks with thatched roofs and packed earth floors. Each house typically has a small courtyard where daily tasks are performed, where maize is ground on stone metes, where children play and dogs drowse in the sun. The homes are sparsely furnished, woven mats for sleeping, ceramic pots for cooking and storage, perhaps a low wooden stool or two. There is little privacy, little separation between inside and outside. Life is lived communally, in the courtyards and streets, in the presence of neighbors and kin. The more prosperous merchants and lower nobles live in larger compounds, with multiple rooms arranged around a central patio, walls plastered and painted, perhaps a small private garden or a shrine to the household gods. The true grandeur of Tenochtitlan is reserved for the nobility, the Pipiltan, whose palaces occupy entire city blocks. These are not single buildings but sprawling complexes of rooms, courtyards, gardens and pools, all enclosed by high walls. The palace of the emperor, the Teletoni, is the largest of all, a city within a city. It has hundreds of rooms, each serving a different function: audience halls where the emperor receives tribute and settles disputes, sleeping quarters for the royal family, kitchens where dozens of cooks prepare elaborate feasts, storerooms filled with tribute goods from across the empire. There are aviaries where exotic birds from the tropical lowlands are kept, their brilliant feathers harvested for use in headdresses and cloaks. There is a zoo of sorts, where jaguars and eagles and other sacred animals are housed and fed. There are gardens of medicinal plants, carefully tended by specialists who know the properties of every leaf and root. There is a library where the painted books, the codices, are stored, folded accordion-style pages of fig bark paper covered with intricate glyphs and images recording history, ritual, tribute, and prophecy. The daily life of Tenochtitlan is governed by routines as ancient as the cultivation of maize. The day begins before dawn. In the households of commoners, the women rise first, lighting the hearth, preparing the morning meal. The central staple is maize, ground into flour and shaped into thin round cakes called tlaxcali, which the Spanish will later call tortillas. These are cooked on a flat clay griddle called a comal, filling the house with the warm, earthy scent of toasted corn. With the tortillas, there might be beans flavored with chili, or a sauce of tomatoes and peppers, or perhaps a small piece of fish or fowl if the family is fortunate. The morning meal is simple, meant to provide energy for the day's labor. The men and older boys eat first, then the women and children. After eating, the men head out to their work farming the chinampas, fishing the lake, crafting goods for trade, laboring on construction projects, or performing military service if called upon. The women remain in or near the household, tending children, weaving cloth, preparing food, carrying water from the aqueducts or canals. Education is universal and compulsory in Tenochtitlan, a rare thing in the ancient world. Every child, regardless of class, attends school. The commoners send their children to the Teotihuacan, the house of youth, where boys learn the arts of war, the history of their people, and the skills needed for their father's trade. Girls attend separate schools where they learn weaving, cooking, and the religious songs and rituals appropriate to women. The children of nobles attend the Karmak, a much more rigorous institution where they study the sacred calendar, the reading and painting of codices, astronomy, rhetoric, poetry, and the complex body of religious knowledge that governs Mexica life. The priests who teach at the Karmak are stern and demanding. The students rise before dawn for ritual bathing in cold water, fast regularly, perform penance by drawing blood from their own tongues and earlobes, and learn to endure discomfort and discipline. This education produces the administrators, priests, and military officers who will run the empire. The canals of Tenochtitlan are its streets, and the canoes are its vehicles. Throughout the day, these waterways are crowded with traffic. There are small fishing canoes, hollowed-out logs paddled by a single person. There are larger cargo canoes, carrying goods to market or building materials to construction sites. There are even canoes that serve as floating food stalls, vendors selling tamales or atole, a warm maize drink, to passers-by. Bridges span the canals at regular intervals, wooden structures that can be raised or removed for defensive purposes. The canals are kept remarkably clean, for the Mexica have a sophisticated understanding of sanitation. Human waste is collected in containers and used as fertilizer for the chinampas, a practice that both maintains hygiene in the city and enriches the soil of the gardens. Public latrines are placed at intervals throughout the city, and there are strict rules about keeping the water clean. The Mexica bathe frequently, often multiple times a day, using steam baths called temazcali for purification and relaxation. Cleanliness is both a practical matter and a religious one, for the gods are believed to favor order, beauty, and purity. The market is the beating heart of Tenochtitlan's economic life. The greatest market is at Tenochtitlan, the twin city on the northern island, which was once an independent settlement but is now fully integrated into Tenochtitlan. On market days, which occur every 5 days according to the ritual calendar, the great plaza of Tenochtitlan fills with tens of thousands of people. Vendors arrive before dawn, setting up their stalls in designated sections, for the market is organized by type of goods. In one area, the textile merchants display their wares: cotton cloth in white and dyed in brilliant colors, red from cochineal insects, blue from indigo, yellow from various plant sources. There are cloaks and loincloths, embroidered blouses, and intricately patterned blankets. In another section, the potters offer ceramics of every kind, cooking pots, serving bowls, storage jars, incense burners shaped like gods and animals, all decorated with painted designs or polished to a high sheen. The food section of the market is a sensory feast. There are pyramids of maize in different colors: white, yellow, red, and black. There are beans and squash and chili peppers in 100 varieties, from mild to fiercely hot. There are tomatoes and avocados, cacao pods and vanilla beans, amaranth seeds and chia. There are live turkeys and ducks in wicker cages, rabbits and deer meat, iguanas and turtles and fish fresh from the lake. There are insects too, considered delicacies: grasshoppers toasted with chili, ant larvae, the eggs of water flies that are gathered from the lake and taste faintly of fish. There are vendors selling prepared foods: tamales stuffed with meat or vegetables, tortillas hot off the griddle, atole in different flavors, and okli, the mildly alcoholic drink made from the fermented sap of the maguey plant, which the Spanish will call pulque. In the luxury goods section, the atmosphere changes. Here the merchants deal in items of immense value: jade beads and carvings, turquoise mosaics, necklaces of gold, worked into delicate forms, feathers from quetzals and parrots and hummingbirds, obsidian blades snapped to a razor edge, mirrors made of polished volcanic glass. The most precious commodity of all is cacao, the chocolate bean, which serves as a form of currency. A single cacao bean might buy you a tama, 100 beans could buy a slave, 1,000 could purchase a fine cotton cloak. The cacao comes from the hot lowlands, from regions far to the south and east, brought to Tenochtitlan as tribute or through long-distance trade. Only the wealthy can afford to drink it regularly. Ground into a frothy bitter beverage, flavored with vanilla and chili, served at feasts and ceremonies. The market is policed by officials who ensure fair dealing, resolve disputes, and enforce the standardized measures for grain and cloth. Cheating is punished harshly, sometimes with death, for the smooth functioning of the market is essential to the city's survival. The market is also a social space, a place to see and be seen, to exchange news and gossip, to arrange marriages, to catch glimpses of people from distant regions dressed in unfamiliar styles. A visitor from the coast might wear a cape of jaguar skin. A merchant from the highlands might have a cloak dyed with the purple of sea snails. The languages of the empire mix together. Nahuatl, the tongue of the Mexica, is dominant, but you might also hear Mixtec, Zapotec, Totonac, or the ancient language of the Maya. The market at Tlatelolco is a microcosm of the empire itself, a place where the wealth and diversity of Mesoamerica converge. Beyond the market and the sacred precinct, beyond the palaces and the chinampas, there is another Tenochtitlan, quieter and more private. This is the city of gardens and flowers. The Mexica are passionate gardeners, and every available space is planted with blooms. Flowers are not mere decoration, they are offerings to the gods, symbols of beauty and transience, metaphors in poetry for the brevity of life. Marigolds, dahlias, and countless other species are cultivated with care. There are public gardens where people stroll in the evening, and private gardens within the palace compounds where the nobility relax. The scent of flowers mingles with the smoke of copal incense, which is burned constantly in temples and homes, creating an atmosphere that is at once earthly and sacred. To walk through Tenochtitlan is to move through a landscape of scents: the sweetness of flowers, the tang of chili roasting, the clean smell of water, the smoke of hearth fires, the musky odor of wet earth. The rhythm of life in Tenochtitlan is punctuated by festivals which occur throughout the year according to the sacred calendar. The Mexica calendar is actually two calendars running simultaneously: the tonal Pohuli, a 260-day ritual cycle, and the Shul Pohuli, a 365-day solar year. These two calendars mesh together like gears, creating a larger cycle of 52 years called a calendar round. Each day has a name and a number, and certain combinations are considered lucky or unlucky, suitable or unsuitable for various activities. The priests study the calendar obsessively, determining the best days for planting, for warfare, for marriage, for beginning construction. The festivals are aligned with the agricultural cycle and the movements of the sun. There are festivals to celebrate the planting of maize, festivals for the harvest, festivals to honor the rain god during the dry season, festivals to honor the sun at the solstices. One of the most important and solemn ceremonies is the new fire ceremony, which occurs once every 52 years at the end of a calendar round. This is a time of profound anxiety, for the Mexica believe that the world might not survive the transition to the next cycle. As the dreaded day approaches, people extinguish all fires in the city, discard their household goods, and fast and pray. Pregnant women are locked away, for it is feared they might transform into monsters if the sun does not rise. On the night of the ceremony, the priests climb to the top of a sacred mountain outside the city. They watch the stars, waiting for the Pleiades to reach the zenith, confirming that the cosmic order still holds. Then, on the chest of a sacrificial captive, they drill a new fire using the friction of wood. When the spark catches and the flame leaps up, messengers race down the mountain with torches, spreading the new fire throughout the city. Hearths are relit, temples blaze with light, and the people rejoice, knowing that the world has been renewed for another 52 years. The Mexica understanding of sacrifice is central to their worldview, and it cannot be understood through a modern lens of morality. For them, sacrifice is not murder but reciprocity, a paying back of the debt owed to the gods. The gods sacrificed themselves to create the world and humanity. In the myth of the fifth sun, the god Tenochtitlan threw himself into a great fire to become the sun, and his blood and body became the source of light and warmth. Humanity, created from the bones of previous generations ground up and mixed with the blood of the gods, owes its very existence to this divine sacrifice. The Mexica believe they must repay this debt with offerings of blood, the most precious substance which contains the life force. Auto-sacrifice, the drawing of one's own blood from the tongue, ears or genitals with thorns or obsidian blades, is a regular practice for priests and nobles, a personal offering to the gods. The sacrifice of captives, taken in war, is seen as the ultimate offering, the life of a warrior given to sustain the gods and the cosmic order. The rituals are elaborate and deeply symbolic. The captive is not treated as a mere victim, but as a representation of the god, dressed in the god's clothing, sometimes kept for months or even a year before the final ceremony, treated with honor and respect. On the day of sacrifice, the captive is led up the pyramid steps in a great procession, accompanied by music and prayers. At the summit, 4 priests hold the captive down on the stone, while a 5th, wielding an obsidian knife, makes a swift incision and removes the heart, which is offered to the sun. The body is then sent down the pyramid steps, to be taken away and sometimes consumed in ritual feasts, for the flesh of the sacrificed is considered sacred, imbued with divine power. These rituals are performed in public, witnessed by crowds, for they are communal acts, not private violence. They are theater and religion combined, spectacles meant to inspire awe and reinforce the social order, to remind everyone of the power of the gods and the duty of the people. Yet the Mexica are not defined solely by sacrifice. They are also poets, philosophers, artists, and musicians. The nobility cultivate eloquence, memorizing long orations and poems that are recited at feasts and ceremonies. There is a rich tradition of philosophy, debates about the nature of the divine, the meaning of life, the reality of the afterlife. Some Mexica thinkers express doubt and melancholy, pondering whether this world is real or merely a dream, whether human efforts have any lasting meaning. One famous poem asks, "Do we speak the truth here, giver of life? We merely dream, we only rise from a dream. All is like a dream." This existential questioning exists alongside the certainty of religious ritual, creating a culture that is complex, contradictory, and deeply human. Music fills the city. Drums of all sizes are played at ceremonies, from small hand drums to enormous upright drums called huichol, whose booming sound can be heard across the valley. Flutes made of clay or bone produce haunting, high-pitched melodies. Conch shell trumpets blast deep, resonant notes. Rattles and rasps add texture and rhythm. The music is often accompanied by dance, elaborate choreographed movements performed by hundreds of dancers at major festivals, their bodies painted and adorned with feathers, their steps synchronized to the drums. Song is considered a divine gift, a way to communicate with the gods and to preserve memory, for the Mexica have no alphabet, no phonetic writing. Their knowledge is transmitted through oral tradition, through songs and stories memorized by specialists, and through the painted codices, which use pictographs and glyphs to record information in a way that is part writing and part art. The rise of the Mexica from refugee wanderers to rulers of an empire is a story of ambition, ruthlessness, and strategic brilliance. The turning point came in 1428. For decades, the Mexica had been subjects of the Tepanec Empire, ruled from the city of Azcapotzalco by the tyrant Maxla. The Mexica paid tribute, provided soldiers, and chafed under the humiliation. When the Tepanec ruler died and Maxla took power, he became increasingly paranoid and cruel. He began murdering the leaders of the subject cities, fearing rebellion. The Mexica, led by their Tlate Itquoit and his brilliant nephew and General Tlate, decided to risk everything. They formed a secret alliance with two other cities, Texcoco, on the eastern shore of the lake, ruled by the philosopher King Nezahualcóyotl, and the smaller city of Teotihuacan. Together, these three cities declared war on Azcapotzalco. The war was brutal and desperate. The Mexica promised their people that if they lost, they would offer themselves as slaves to the Tepanec, but they did not lose. Through a combination of fierce fighting and strategic maneuvering, they besieged Azcapotzalco, cut off its supplies, and finally stormed the city. Maxdark was captured and sacrificed. The Tepanec Empire collapsed. In the aftermath, the three allied cities formed a pact, the Triple Alliance, agreeing to share the spoils of future conquests. Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Teotihuacan would rule together, though in practice Tenochtitlan quickly became the dominant partner. This victory transformed the Mexica. They were no longer subjects, they were conquerors, and they had an empire to build. Over the next 90 years, the Mexica expanded their control across central and southern Mexico. They did not seek to occupy and directly govern conquered territories. Instead, they imposed a tribute system. A defeated city would be allowed to keep its own rulers and customs, but it would be required to send regular payments to Tenochtitlan: maize, beans, cotton, cacao, gold, feathers, jade, and other valuable goods. The amounts were carefully recorded in tribute lists, painted codices that specified exactly what was owed and when. Failure to pay brought swift and brutal retribution. The Mexica would send their armies, burn the city, sacrifice the leaders, and impose even harsher terms. This system was efficient and ruthless. It allowed a relatively small population to control a vast area, extracting wealth without the need for a large occupying force. The empire expanded in all directions. To the south, the Mexica conquered the rich valleys of Oaxaca and Morelos. To the east, they pushed into the Gulf Coast, taking control of the humid lowlands where cacao and vanilla grew. To the west, they fought inconclusive wars against the Tarascan kingdom of Michoacán, one of the few powers they could not defeat. To the north, they expanded into the arid highlands, though these regions offered less tribute. At its height, the empire controlled perhaps 5 million people across hundreds of city-states, united not by culture or language, but by the threat of force and the flow of tribute. The wealth that poured into Tenochtitlan was staggering. Every day, thousands of tribute-bearers arrived at the city, their backs laden with goods, to be received by the royal storekeepers and distributed to the nobility, the warriors, the priests, and the emperor himself. This tribute system funded the grandeur of the city. It paid for the construction of new temples and palaces, and fed the population, supplementing the produce of the chinampas. It allowed the warrior class to focus on training and campaigning rather than farming, and it created a culture of conspicuous consumption and display among the nobility. The people team dressed in elaborate costumes of feathers and gold, ate exotic foods and competed with one another in the splendor of their households. Yet the system also created deep resentment among the subject peoples. Many of them hated the Mexica, resented the tribute payments and longed for freedom. This resentment would later prove to be a fatal weakness when strangers arrived from the east offering an alliance against the hated empire. In the year 1502, a new emperor ascended to the throne of Tenochtitlan. His name was Moctezuma Xocoyotzin, known to history as Moctezuma II. He was a man of great intelligence and deep piety, a former high priest who had been educated at the Calmec and trained in all the sacred knowledge of the Mexica. As Teotihuacan, he would preside over the empire at the height of its power and wealth, but also in the years leading up to its most profound crisis. Moctezuma expanded the empire further, campaigning in regions that had resisted previous emperors. He also reformed the court, increasing the ceremonial and hierarchical nature of rule. Under his reign, the nobility became more distant from the common people, more elaborate in their dress and ritual. Access to the emperor became more restricted, hedged about with complex protocols. One did not simply walk into the emperor's presence. One approached on one's knees, eyes lowered, offering gifts and speaking in elaborate formal phrases. The emperor's palace was a wonder of the world, though few from outside the Mexico elite ever saw its interior. It occupied an entire city block, a labyrinth of rooms and courtyards built of stone and plastered in white, red, and blue. The main audience hall was vast, its ceiling supported by carved wooden beams, its walls painted with murals depicting the history of the Mexica and the deeds of the gods. Here Moctezuma sat on a low throne covered with jaguar skins and cushions, surrounded by his advisors, receiving tribute from distant provinces, settling disputes between nobles and pronouncing judgments. The throne room had a kind of sacred quality. Visitors were required to remove their sandals and dress in simple maguey fiber cloaks, no matter their rank, to show humility before the emperor. Moctezuma himself dressed in the finest cotton, dyed in brilliant colors, and wore a headdress of quetzal feathers, the long green plumes of the most sacred bird, shimmering in the light. Behind the public rooms lay the private quarters of the royal family, and beyond them, the gardens and aviaries that were Moctezuma's particular passion. The aviaries were enormous structures, open courtyards covered with nets where hundreds of birds from across the empire were kept. There were parrots and macaws in every color, toucans with their absurd beaks, tiny hummingbirds fed on sugar water by attendants, great eagles that were offered fresh meat daily. The birds were not just decoration, their feathers were harvested for use in the elaborate costumes and headdresses worn by the nobility and priests. Skilled artisans, working in special workshops, would painstakingly tie thousands of individual feathers onto frames of wicker and cloth, creating images of gods, warriors, and animals that seemed to shimmer and move in the light. These featherwork pieces were among the most valued art objects in Mesoamerica, more precious than gold. Moctezuma also maintained gardens of medicinal plants, where every herb and flower known to the Mexica was cultivated and studied. Healers and physicians, trained in the long tradition of Mesoamerican medicine, worked in these gardens preparing remedies for the emperor and his court. The Mexica understanding of medicine was sophisticated, based on centuries of empirical observation. They knew which plants could reduce fever, which could ease pain, which could induce visions or cause death. They practiced surgery, setting broken bones and trepanning skulls. They understood the importance of cleanliness and diet in maintaining health. The gardens were not just practical, they were also places of beauty and contemplation, where the emperor could walk in the evening, surrounded by the scent of flowers and the sound of fountains, away from the demands of rule. Yet even in this time of peace and prosperity, there were signs of unease. The Mexica were deeply attuned to omens, to signs from the gods, and in the years leading up to 1519, strange things were reported. The scribes and poets who later recorded these events, writing after the conquest, may have embellished them, knowing how the story ended. But the omens are part of the historical record, part of how the Mexica themselves understood their fate. It was said that a comet appeared in the sky, visible in daylight for a year, stretching across the heavens like a wound. It was said that the temple of Huitzilopochtli caught fire spontaneously and burned despite all efforts to extinguish it, the flames seeming to feed on water itself. It was said that lightning struck the temple of Huitzilopochtli, the fire god, without thunder, on a clear day, a violation of the natural order. It was said that the lake boiled and flooded without cause, destroying houses on the shore. One particularly disturbing omen involved a bird. Fishermen on the lake caught a strange crane-like bird with a mirror in its head, a polished surface of bone or crystal. They brought it to Moctezuma. When he looked into the mirror, he saw not his own reflection but a vision of the night sky, the stars visible in the middle of the day. When he looked again, he saw warriors riding on the backs of deer, a sight that made no sense, for deer could not be ridden. The priests who witnessed this were terrified. They tried to interpret the vision, but before they could, the bird flew away, never to be seen again. Whether these omens were real or invented later, they reflect a deep anxiety in Mexican society, a sense that something fundamental was about to change, that the world they knew was fragile and impermanent. The Mexica lived in cyclical time. They believed that history repeated itself, that patterns established by the gods in the distant past would play out again and again. One of the most powerful myths in their tradition was the story of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, an ancient god-king who had ruled the Toltecs in a golden age of peace and wisdom. According to the legend, Quetzalcoatl was tricked and shamed by his rival, the sorcerer god Tezcatlipoca. In his grief and humiliation, Quetzalcoatl left his city and journeyed to the Eastern Sea, where he sailed away on a raft of serpents, promising to return one day to reclaim his kingdom. The year of his departure was said to be one reed in the sacred calendar. The year 1519 in the European calendar was also a one-reed year. As reports began to filter into Tenochtitlan of strange ships on the eastern coast, of pale-skinned men with beards and armor who rode on the backs of animals like deer but larger, some among the Mexica wondered if this might be the return of Quetzalcoatl, the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. Moctezuma sent emissaries to the coast to investigate. They brought back reports that troubled him deeply. These strangers were not gods, but they were unlike any people the Mexica had encountered. They possessed weapons that could kill at a distance, sticks that thundered like lightning and spat fire and death. They wore hard shells that arrows could not pierce. They had animals, horses, though the Mexica did not know the word, that were larger and faster than any creature in Mexico. And they were asking questions about Tenochtitlan, about the emperor, about gold. Moctezuma was caught between curiosity and fear, between the desire to know more and the instinct to prevent these strangers from reaching his city. He sent gifts, fine cloth, featherwork, gold. He sent warnings, messages that they should go back to wherever they came from. But the strangers did not leave. They began to march inland toward the valley, toward the lake, toward Tenochtitlan. But this is not the story we are telling tonight. This is not a story of conquest or ending. This is the story of Tenochtitlan as it was, in its full glory, before the world changed. So let us return to the city, to the moment before the strangers arrived, to the time when the Mexica still believed their empire would last forever, that the sun would continue to rise because they made the proper offerings, that the chinampas would keep producing food, that the tribute would keep flowing, that the gods were satisfied. Let us return to an ordinary day in the city, a day when the future was still open, when the outcome was not yet written. It is late afternoon now, and the light is beginning to soften. The merchants are packing up their goods at the market, wrapping unsold items in cloth, loading them back into canoes. The canals are busy with traffic, everyone heading home for the evening meal. In the houses of the commoners, fires are being lit, pots of beans set to simmer, tortillas shaped and cooked for the family. Children play in the narrow streets and courtyards, their laughter echoing off the adobe walls. On the Champas, farmers are finishing the day's work, checking the water levels in the canals, harvesting the last ripe tomatoes or squash before the sun sets. The air is filled with the sound of birds settling into the reeds for the night, the distant boom of a drum from one of the temples marking the passage of time. In the palace, Moctezuma is preparing for the evening rituals. He bathes, changes into fresh clothing, and walks to the private shrine where he will make offerings to the gods, burning incense and speaking the prayers he has known since childhood. Around him, the palace is a hive of quiet activity, servants preparing the evening meal, guards changing shifts, scribes organizing the tribute records that arrive during the day. The life of the palace is governed by routine, by the calendar, by the obligations of rank and duty. Outside, in the sacred precinct, the priests are climbing the steps of the Templo Mayor to perform the sunset ceremony, offering blood and prayers as the sun descends toward the western mountains. The light turns golden, then red, then purple. The volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, glow pink in the last rays of the sun, their snow-covered peaks floating above the darkening valley like dreams. As night falls, the city quiets. Candles and small oil lamps are lit in the houses, casting a warm glow through doorways and windows. The streets, which have no lighting, become dark and empty. People stay indoors, for the night is considered dangerous, a time when the spirits of the dead walk and malevolent forces are abroad. The city sleeps, or mostly sleeps, for in the temples the priests maintain their vigils, keeping the sacred fires burning, watching the stars, ensuring that the cosmic order is maintained. The night is filled with small sounds, the lap of water against the champas, the cry of a nightbird, the rustle of reeds in the breeze, the distant bark of a dog. The moon rises, casting silver light on the lake, making the water shimmer like molten metal. From above, if you could see the valley from the sky, Tenochtitlan would appear as a pattern of lights, a jewel set in the dark water, connected to the shore by the pale lines of the causeways, surrounded by the vast shadowy presence of the mountains. The city endures through the night, as it has endured for nearly 200 years. As the Mexica believe it will endure forever. They cannot imagine a world without Tenochtitlan. It is the center of their universe, the proof of their covenant with the gods, the fulfillment of the prophecy that brought their ancestors to this island. The city is not just a place, it is an idea, a statement of human will and divine favor. It says that a people with nothing can become a people with everything, that a swamp can become a paradise, that the impossible can be made real through faith and labor. The Mexica look at their city and see a miracle, and they are not wrong. But all empires are temporary. All cities, no matter how grand, are fragile. The Mexica themselves know this, for they live among the ruins of Teotihuacan. They remember the fall of the Toltecs. They recite poems about the transience of life and the inevitability of death. Yet knowing this does not prepare them for what is to come. How could it? They are living in the moment, in the fullness of their power, and the future is hidden from them as it is hidden from all of us. The story of Tenochtitlan's fall has been told many times, in many ways. But the story of its life, of its daily rhythms and sacred rituals, of its gardens and markets and canals, this story is less often told. And yet it is the more important story, the one that reveals the complexity and humanity of a civilization that is too often reduced to stereotypes of violence and sacrifice. The legacy of Tenochtitlan is not just in ruins and museums, though there are many ruins, and many museums hold treasures taken from this place. The legacy lives in the people, in the millions of Mexicans who speak Nahuatl still, who cultivate the same crops, who tell the old stories, who remember. It lives in the foods that went from Tenochtitlan to the world: maize and beans, tomatoes and avocados, chocolate and vanilla, chili peppers and squash. It lives in the place names, for Mexico itself is named for the Mexica, and countless towns and cities across the country bear Nahuatl names. It lives in the art and symbolism, the eagle and the serpent that appear on the Mexican flag, the same eagle and serpent from the founding myth of Tenochtitlan. If you go to Mexico City today, you can still find traces of the vanished city. In the center, where the great plaza of the Zocalo now stands, archaeologists have excavated the Templo Mayor. You can walk down into the excavation and see the layers of the pyramid, the offerings buried within, the stone sculptures of gods and serpents that once adorned the temple. You can see the skull racks, the tzompantli, where the skulls of sacrificed captives were displayed. You can see the carving of Coyol Sonque, the moon goddess, her dismembered body rendered in exquisite detail, found at the base of the pyramid where it was placed to commemorate a myth of cosmic warfare. The museum next to the excavation displays thousands of objects recovered from the site: jade and gold, obsidian and shell, ceramic and stone, the material culture of a civilization. In the south of the city, in the neighborhood of Xochimilco, the chinampas still exist. They are a UNESCO World Heritage Site now, a living connection to the agricultural genius of the Mexica. You can hire a trajinera, a brightly painted flat-bottomed boat, and be poled through the canals, past the narrow islands still planted with flowers and vegetables, the willow trees still standing along the edges. It is a tourist attraction now, festive and commercialized, with floating vendors selling food and mariachi bands serenading the boats. But on a quiet morning, if you go early before the crowds, you can still feel the presence of the old city, the silence of the water, the beauty of the gardens, the sense of a landscape shaped by human hands over centuries. The story of Tenochtitlan is a story of resilience and creativity, of a people who refused to accept the limitations of their environment, and instead transformed it into an advantage. It is a story of religious devotion carried to extremes, of a worldview so different from our own that it challenges us to think beyond our assumptions about what is normal or acceptable. It is a story of empire and oppression, of conquered peoples and tribute demands, of violence justified by cosmology. It is a story of beauty and art, of poetry and music, of gardens and festivals. It is all of these things at once, complex and contradictory, impossible to reduce to simple judgments. As you lie here now, in the quiet of your own night, perhaps you can imagine it one more time. The city on the water, the pyramids rising against the sky, the canoes gliding through the canals, the sound of drums echoing across the valley. Imagine the markets filled with color and voices, the scent of flowers and incense, the taste of chocolate and chili. Imagine the farmers tending their chinampas, the priests climbing the temple steps, the children learning the old songs in the schools. Imagine a world where the lakes are full and the mountains are clear, where the air is clean and the stars are bright, where a civilization thrives in the place that will one day become one of the largest cities on earth. Hold that image for a moment, let it linger as you begin to drift towards sleep. The city built on water, Tenochtitlan, the place of the prickly pear cactus, the heart of the Mexica world. It existed for less than 200 years as an imperial capital, a brief flash in the long span of human history, but in that time, it achieved something remarkable. It proved that human beings can create beauty and order and meaning even in the most unlikely places, that culture and civilization are not bound by geography or resources, that the will to build and create and survive can overcome almost any obstacle. The Mexica built their city on water, on mud, on nothing, and for a time it was one of the wonders of the world. And so our journey through the past comes to an end. The sun has set over the valley, the volcanoes have faded into the darkness. The city sleeps, or perhaps it is we who sleep, dreaming of a world that once was and is no more, except in memory, in the stones beneath Mexico City, in the stories still told, in the crops still grown, in the language still spoken. Thank you for walking with me through the streets of Tenochtitlan, for standing at the edge of the lake, for witnessing the life of a city that time has not entirely erased. Rest now. Let the images fade gently. Dream of pyramids and canals, of eagles and serpents, of a floating city in a mountain valley, of the long ago and the far away. Sleep well, and may the fifth sun continue to rise, as it has for 500 years since the Mexica made their last offering, as it will for 500 more, remembering.